This episode is brought to you by 180 Markets, where it is our goal to bring every individual, fund manager, family office, or any qualified investor access to Australian Stock Exchange capital raises. If you are ever interested in how to access ASX capital raises in a super simple way, 180 Markets is for you. The sign-up process is easy. You just upload your ID, proof of your investor status, and your current brokerage account information. The settlement of shares goes right into your existing account, and you can access our very next capital raise. If you're interested in free, easy access to thousands of ASX capital raises, including placements, IPOs, reverse takeovers, and more, check out 180markets.com.au. Hello, everybody. Welcome back. Another edition of 18 Minutes with 180 Markets. Fellow investors, we know we're always trying to find those right investment ideas. And it's even more important right now to be stock specific as opposed to just general, because markets are a little bit more treacherous. And that's why we are so excited to bring back to the show a uranium explorer, Alligator Energy. And for those of you who remember or who haven't yet gotten on to Greg Hall from Alligator, he's here to talk all about the company, what's progressed, what's happened, especially there's some incredibly exciting news that's really happened in the last 72 hours. And with that introduction, Greg, welcome back to the show.
Thank you very much, Greg, and nice to be chatting again.
Yeah. Hey, Greg, for those who don't maybe know your background, can you again just provide them with a couple minutes about yourself?
Okay, I have, in specific to my uranium experience, was on the Olympic Dam project right through the 80s, ending up as mining manager there in the early 90s. I spent some time in iron ore and in nickel, then came back to uranium as ops manager for Ranger Uranium project and the Ranger 3 and the Ranger 3 Deeps work, and along with the Jabiluka project. Then was marketing uranium nuclear fuel for ERA, for Rio Tinto, for 4 years, mainly in North America with a bit of European. And then was founding managing director of Toro Energy Limited, and where we kicked off and achieved the first fully approved uranium project at Luna in Western Australia. So after that, on the board of Toro, but then also on the board of Alligator, and was asked by the retiring chairman to take over as CEO in Alligator in early 18. And that's where we are. That's my background in uranium specifically, and there's a few other things on the way in copper and other minerals.
Absolutely, absolutely. And so, as someone as yourself who's been a long time player in uranium, can you just talk about, since the Biden administration took over and the U.S. has made some, very positive announcements about uranium, in the second half of 2020, what have you seen, and maybe this is a high level comment about just in the uranium markets since the Biden administration has taken over?
Well, look, you're right. There's been a number of policy decisions out of the US which have impacted uranium equities and have started to impact price, but not in a major way yet. Certainly in the last few years, there's been a fundamental thesis coming out in the uranium business that the overhang of inventory from the Japanese tsunami and the Fukushima event, which did impact the nuclear industry to some extent, that overhang of inventory started to really decline rapidly. Not only that, people forget there's been a lot of new build in nuclear. So from between 2016 and 2020, there was 15% increase in nuclear power around the world globally. So there has been that growth. So the combination of all those together has put us where we are in the last year or two, where there's a fundamental shortfall of new supply going forward. So 180 to 200 million pound per year being required, 130 to 150 million pound currently being produced. So there is that fundamental shortfall, the gap being filled by existing inventories. Now, what we're seeing is the economic platforms being put in place to support ongoing nuclear and nuclear growth. So right from 4th of December onwards, when the strategic reserve was announced in the States, such that the US government Department of Energy can now buy uranium produced in the States only, and keep that as strategic reserve for future requirements. That supports the US producers, takes the material off the market, and means there's more material going to come in. The second aspect was then the Russian suspension agreement, which restricts again the amount of material that can come out of Russia in particular into the US. That again means it clarifies what the US utilities can buy on the market going forward. The third key one was the Biden administration supporting nuclear, specifically the new nuclear technologies, generation 3 plus and small modular reactors, as part of the low carbon energy footprint for the future. But the most recent one is they've also now offering tax credits such that older nuclear plants, which are still very viable, very safe, and actually have been modernised such that they have new control systems and things, they are allowed to keep operating for a good period of time. So those four key things out of the US have what's driven the equity market in the last period of 4 or 5 months. Along with that, though, you're still getting the ongoing build out of China, the ongoing new construction out of a range of other countries, including United Arab Emirates and other countries in Europe and indeed in the US itself. So the combination of those things has now gradually started to ramp up the support. I must stress again, though, the spot price has firmed to around $30 a pound. It's yet to climb much higher. What the market's waiting for now is those long-term nuclear utilities to come out and look for new long-term contracts. That'll really start to set the scene for where does that contract price move forward. And that's really what the industry is looking for.
Absolutely. And in our last conversation, you highlighted how there could be a big difference between where spot prices are and where long-term contract prices are actually signed.
Well, that's true. So even now, the spot price around $30 a pound, the current long-term price, which is the price the market estimates that you could do a long-term contract at now, is around 37 or 38. So there's always that sort of difference. And in general, that's because for a primary producer to commit to long-term supply, they want to see a premium. For a utility to actually obtain long-term supply, that is security supply, they know they have to pay a premium. And that's the way that market arrangement is set.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it's always good to operate in a market that has strong demand, which is where you're at right now. And then maybe coming in a little bit more specifically, can you just talk about Alligator and Samphire, your main project and also your other projects, just where do we stand at this point?
Look, absolutely. So just as an overview, our strategy going forward here is very much our most recent asset that we've acquired. The Samphire project is an early stage development. We've done initial work on it. We want to take that forward into its next steps, which I'll talk about shortly. We also are focused on our existing exploration projects, and your viewers may know that we commenced our first geophysics on the Cooper Basin Big Lake Uranium project. It's taken a long time to get a crew there, because of border closures, and there's been so much exploration in Western Australia that a lot of the experienced teams were reluctant to come out of there. So we're now starting that work. We've got the Alligator Rivers tenements granted, and we want to do that work. So that's our existing exploration portfolio for uranium. And the third key leg of the uranium picture is, again, future opportunities. We were looking well before we acquired the Samphire project at a range of opportunities in target markets, and we haven't stopped looking. We're still looking at others. And the announcement of our deal with Traxys this week will, in particular, support number 1 and number 3, the advancement of Samphire and the search for future opportunities.
Absolutely. And I think, we spoke about this at length, that your experience, and when I say you, meaning the Alligator team within the uranium markets, it's really invaluable towards just knowing the various players, knowing what can get done and what can't get done. And maybe that's a good segue to talk about, as we touched on earlier, you've had major news over the last 72 hours in an agreement with Traxys. Can you just talk a little bit about who they are and what does it mean from an Alligator perspective?
All right. Look, Traxys are a global commodity trading group. They trade in a range of metals and energy commodities around the world. They've had an uranium trading division for many years. I would suggest much more than 15 years. Kevin Smith, who's the managing director of that group, and I've known Kevin off and on for some time. They are a group, along with other traders, who take the opportunity to pick up the short-term supply or put options on future supply and deliver that into markets going forward. So they are, in general, that's been their business model, that short-term trader. But on occasion, they have linked up with primary producers to do work like we're talking about. So the link up with us it's early stage for us, and normally, in a very early stage project like Samphire, you probably wouldn't do a marketing link up this early, but the opportunity it creates for us is manyfold. And the key areas are, first of all, once you start on a path of a feasibility and approvals process, that's the time you can start talking to nuclear utilities. Traxys know all the nuclear utilities, not just the US, but globally. So they can help those communications with us right from day one. The second key area will be helping to put in long-term contracts as we get closer to production. You generally would put in your first contracts even before you have final approvals, but you know you're going to proceed. And so then you have conditional contracts put in place. Based upon those initial contracts, Traxys have the ability and the willingness, as in our agreement, to help fund a portion of our pre-development startup, that is our construction startup. So that's another aspect. With their balance sheet, they can help to fund the startup of our projects. And of course, they know, as our team does, a range of projects around the world and the players around the world. And together we can sort of work, is there some ways we can obtain or farm into some key future opportunities in uranium going forward. So that's the mix of skill sets that we now have on a combined basis, if you like. Specifically, it's a marketing agency agreement, which means that they are a marketing agent. We still fund the business and operate the business in terms of future primary production. But it also means you can do, let's call it combined marketing out there. If we are bidding on a long-term contract to a nuclear utility, and we bid for uranium produced, let's say, from Samphire or any other origin uranium that's suitable to be delivered, then we can back that in with some traded uranium, and you can actually market and sell more uranium than you actually produce. And a number of companies around the world have done this for a while. Cameco, for example, when they were producing 22 million pounds of uranium, they were selling 30. So it's a way to augment your production with relationships in the long-term utilities, and Traxys have that ability to support. Another key aspect of the deal is, as we start up in production, if you have any pitfalls in your production startup on the way, you've got a major trading group that can help to deliver backup pounds to support that. So all of those attributes of this combined deal are attractive both to Traxys and to ourselves, and consequently to our shareholders.
Absolutely. It just sounds like it's just so much more than just capital or just somebody out there to help sell your product. It's truly, it sounds like a relationship, and especially because, let's face it, to find out, where other potential projects around the world, it's not always so easy to find them. But if you have somebody helping you out, it certainly makes life a lot easier.
No, that's correct. And look, you asked this question, of course, and we've been talking to to Traxys for some time. Late last year is when we had our first engagement, and we were talking about a range of opportunities between us going forward. And we have already identified some potential opportunities and how we might want to move. We've also, separate to Traxys' support out in New York and their knowledge of the market, we've engaged directly an ad hoc experienced consultant in the finance and evaluation market for uranium projects out of Denver, and he's helping us to evaluate potential future projects. And I think, as I've said to your viewers before, in terms of future opportunities for us, whether it be an exploration or existing uranium resource projects, we've tended to target either certain countries in Africa, depending on the politics at the time, within Australia, because we know the Australian market and like the Australian market, but also in the US, because there has been a lot of underinvestment in potential US uranium projects in the past. You've now got a lot of government support for future investment in uranium in the US. So we think they're the areas that we'll have a good look at.
Absolutely. There's a lot, there are a lot of different directions you can go, it sounds like. And, just turning to Samphire specifically, over the next, call it like 12 to 24 months, what would you like to ideally see, or what should investors be looking for?
Well, look, we've been quite clear in what we're undertaking this year when we went out to the market with our desktop study in December. We have a fully inferred resource, which means that we can't release forward-looking statements on that resource. So we can't put out production rates, estimated costs and things. But we know them. We've done that first desktop study and looking at 4 or 5 different scenarios on what it might look like. What we need to do this year, and we're funded to do that because we raised the funds through 180 Markets in December for this. Okay. We are funded to do the initial resource exploration work. So we've now done our ground geophysics, our ground magnetics plus our passive seismic. We're planning the drilling program now. Drilling is intended to start in July onwards. And the drilling will encompass looking at the higher grade zones and using the magnetics in particular to see whether there is any other potential structural high grade zones. Can we lift the grade of the resource? Infill drilling the resource, so we lift it from all inferred to a good portion of indicated resource and upgrade resource, and potential extensions along the channels we know are clear, they're marked, but we can now identify much more accurately where to drill. So that's the drilling work, along with taking some core samples, some fresh core samples for updated ANSTO testing, using the more modern resins that are around now. So the last testing that was done on recovery of the uranium from the leach liquor was probably nearly 10 years ago. So we want to update that because there's a lot more modern resins that are more selective and more accurate now. The company Boss Resources did some fantastic work in this field about 2 years ago to update their feasibility. And so we're emulating that with the ANSTO test work. So the combination towards the end of this year is we have an upgraded and updated resource and hopefully expanded. We have the test work completed, and we'll do an updated scoping study, which we then can, based on the updated resource, release to the market. So that's our aim by the end of this year, is to have that detailed scoping done and released. Now, provided we have all the positive economics and signs from that this year, our intent then next year is to initiate a feasibility study, initiate baseline environmental, initiate approvals, and through all of this, right from well before today and ongoing, our community Indigenous engagement work, we have to ramp that up as well. So, we're honest about this when we talk to the market. To really get an approved uranium project, even in South Australia, which has that experience, takes at least 3 years. So we need to initiate that work soon to match up with where we believe the market will be in that 3 to 4 year time frame.
Absolutely. And, again, I keep drawing back to your experience, you know how long it takes. And also, frankly, 3 years can go by, maybe I'm showing my age, very quickly these days, if you know what I mean. It's a lot of blocking and tackling. Is that accurate?
Well, that's correct. In a way, no, it's actually a lot of detail and a lot of thoroughness. You really need to be thorough in your work with community and with Indigenous people. You need to be thorough in your baseline environmental work. You need to be thorough then in the documentation you prepare and the outcomes, and looking at the latest regulations in terms of both the ground, the hydrogeology, the air quality, all of those things. And make sure you put together a mineral lease application and environmental approval, which will pass muster. You need to also gather a team. Okay, and now I'm starting that process because we know what we'll need to do going forward. And so you have to have all of that engaged and operating, and that's important. So Samphire is a main channel for us to go forward in production with the support of Traxys at the right time. What we're hoping is through the other avenue of evaluation, farming, acquisition, it may not be our only project we can take forward. So our aim is to try and do more than one, but let's work hard on what we've got while we look around.
Yeah, no, the way that we view it is that Alligator, Samphire alone is amazing, but then there's all this upside optionality of backing the team that, you just don't know what's out there, but certainly there is a lot of positive momentum within the sector, for sure. Greg, before you go, you just coming back to one point you mentioned before, that techniques today, you said, are far different than they were even 10 years ago. And I think it's also important for people to understand nuclear has come a long way as far as the technology since the 1980s. Can you just give viewers maybe like a very high level view of just how far things have progressed?
Look, most certainly. We've had a range of, let's call it, nuclear generation reactors around the world. The first generation, generation one, are the ones built in the 50s and early 60s. The second generation is from the late 60s through to the 70s, if you like. The third generation is from the 1980s onwards, and they're the dominant major reactors around the world. Now, all of those technologies, look, they're inherently very safe. Any good studied analysis of nuclear power and the issues that have happened to show that, despite a few significant accidents that have occurred, they've been inherently safe for the kilowatts generated. But a single accident can create a massive impact and therefore a lot of drama and a lot of angst going forward, and we see that, and that's what's occurred. The new generation reactors, which are generation 3 plus and 4 and the small modular, are generally all what's called passive safety. In other words, they don't need to have power maintained to them to be able to shut down safely. Fukushima, the issue there was they lost their backup generators in the tidal wave. They didn't have power for 16 hours, and hence they had the internal meltdowns in each of the containments. Now, the containments did what their job was. They contained that material, but they still melted. The thing about passive safety in inherently new designs is if you lose power, you have a shutdown, you don't need power to shut down. It just shuts down and cools down by itself. The same with the small modular reactor. So that inherent passive safety is what has been worked on for many years now, and it's now there in place. And the proof of the pudding, in a way, is like for the first time, the Australian government has had in its white paper in late 2019 that they want to keep the roadmap open, if you like, for modern nuclear, being that generation 3 plus the small modular, because of the status of that technology now. So that has changed dramatically the view of nuclear. And that's why you're seeing both, like the Democrats in the US for the first time, support nuclear in backing up its low carbon energy. And you're now seeing the European Union for the very first time recognize nuclear as a low carbon energy source. So there is a change going on in the global nuclear market in the context of this.
Absolutely. You know, it's just incredible how technology really has affected everyone's lives, and even in areas that you seemingly wouldn't think. I mean, we all know about our mobile phones per se, but really in so many other areas too. The last 10, 20 years has just been a phenomenal ride. Greg, in closing, any final words for the audience?
Look, I think we've been very grateful for the support and in some cases the patience of our shareholders over the last many years, as we've tried to make sure that our assets that we've got in place are going to create value for the company, and we're still going to do that. And I haven't really talked much about the Alligator Rivers or our nickel cobalt standing in Italy, which is now attracting attention. So we still have work on those assets, make no bones about it. We'll be doing some work. We're grateful for the patience that shareholders have shown in terms of coming forward through out of the low price times of uranium now into a more supportive market. We recognise that we've got opportunity and we have to embrace it carefully, but we also recognise there's a potential path here over the next few years, let's call the medium-term outlook of a build-up of uranium. And if you want to be on that potential supply forefront with nuclear utilities for uranium, then we have to keep moving, and that's what we intend to do. But we are well funded for our work this year. We believe our work this year is going to add value. We want to get that value to our shareholders to take the company forward.
Absolutely. Greg, please stay in touch, and thank you very much for checking in.
Thanks very much, Greg. It's a pleasure. All the best.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you for watching another presentation by 180 Markets. Don't forget, if you want access to thousands of ASX capital raises, head on over to 180markets.com.au, sign up, and get on board for our very next capital raise. Thanks for watching.